My name is Lena Whitaker, 27 years old, and this is the story of how my parents, Frank and Margaret, decided I was not their daughter. I was their servant. Meanwhile, my younger sister Sophie was treated like royalty. You know that saying, family always has your back? Yeah. Turns out that only applies when you are the favorite. Growing up in our house felt like living inside a twisted version of Cinderella, except there were no glass slippers, no fairy godmother, and no happy music swelling in the background. There were just dirty dishes, leaking faucets, grocery bags cutting into my fingers, and my mother's voice calling from another room like I existed only when something needed doing. Lena, mow the lawn. Lena, drive Sophie to her friend's house. Lena, fix the sink. You're good with tools, right? Lena, don't make a face. Family helps family. Sophie was the princess. Straight A's even when everyone knew she barely studied. New clothes before school started. Birthday parties with rented decorations, custom cakes, and my mother crying over how beautiful her baby girl looked. Me? My birthdays were always postponed. We'll celebrate later, Margaret would say, not even looking up from her phone. Things are tight right now. Funny how things were never tight when Sophie wanted concert tickets, a new laptop, or a dress she would wear once, and then leave on her bedroom floor. Holidays were worse. Sophie unwrapped gadgets, jewelry, coats, makeup palettes, everything wrapped in shiny paper with perfect bows. I got socks, sometimes used ones Frank swore were basically new. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself being the reliable one meant something. I told myself one day they would notice. They didn't. By the time I was 20, I was working full-time, paying rent to live under their roof, and still doing most of the maintenance around the house. Sophie, 2 years younger, lived rent-free, drove a car they bought her, and somehow still needed help covering her expenses. Any time I questioned it, Frank gave me the same tired look. She's your sister, Lena. Family helps family. But family never meant Sophie helping me. It never meant my parents caring that I came home exhausted, with sore feet and grease under my nails from fixing something that should have been a professional's job. Family meant me being available. Family meant me being useful. And if I ever stopped being useful, suddenly, I was selfish. The only people who treated me like a human being were my best friend Daniel and his dad, Richard. Richard saw through everything. He never made some dramatic speech at first. He just noticed. He noticed when I showed up tired. He noticed when I flinched every time my phone buzzed. He noticed when I laughed off insults that clearly weren't jokes. At his house, nobody asked me to repair a cabinet before dinner. Nobody handed me car keys and told me to pick someone up. They asked if I wanted coffee. They asked how work was. Simple things, normal things, things that felt so unfamiliar they almost made me uncomfortable. Then Sophie got engaged. Of course, Frank and Margaret acted like the royal wedding had arrived. My mother cried on Facebook. My father toasted Sophie as the joy of our lives. They talked about venues, flowers, photographers, dresses, everything. At first, I tried to be happy for her. I really did. Then they told me my role. Not maid of honor, not bridesmaid, not even respected guest. Margaret sat me down at the kitchen table, smiling like she was offering me an honor. We'll need you to drive some relatives to the venue, she said, and help set up decorations before the ceremony. Frank added, You're practical. Sophie doesn't need stress on her big day. I stared at them. So, am I in the wedding? Margaret's smile tightened. Well, sweetheart, it's Sophie's day. The photos have a certain look, and we don't want things to feel crowded. Crowded? That was the word she chose. Then Frank cleared his throat and said, We also expect you to chip in a little. Weddings are expensive. Something inside me went very still. I looked at Sophie, waiting for her to say something. Anything. She just glanced at her ring and said, It would really help if you didn't make this about you. That was the moment the glass cracked. Not shattered yet. Not loudly. Just one clean line across everything I had forced myself to believe. I realized this wasn't bad timing. It wasn't favoritism they would grow out of. It wasn't me being too sensitive. This was who they were. And I was done, pretending love was supposed to feel like labor. After the whole, you can help set up but stay out of the photos conversation, something changed in me. Not dramatically, not all at once. It felt more like watching frost spread across glass slow enough that you keep pretending nothing's wrong until suddenly you can't see through it anymore. Every comment replayed differently in my head. Every favor, every sacrifice. Every time Frank yelled my name from another room like I was customer service with legs, I started asking questions I should have asked years earlier. Why was I paying rent in a house where I also handled repairs? Why was I expected to cancel plans whenever Sophie needed something? Why did Richard know more about my life than my own father? Speaking of Richard, he became impossible to ignore after that. Originally, I only spent time at his house because Daniel was my best friend. But slowly, Richard stopped feeling like my friend's dad and started feeling like the only adult in my life who actually saw me. One night I showed up exhausted after repainting Sophie's old bedroom because Margaret said, "It'll increase resale value someday." Richard handed me coffee, looked at the paint splatters on my jeans, and asked quietly, "Lena, when are you going to stop letting them treat you like unpaid staff?" I laughed automatically, then realized I didn't have an answer. Richard leaned back. Being the reliable daughter doesn't mean volunteering to disappear. That sentence stayed with me. So I started small. When Margaret asked me to drive 2 hours to pick up wedding favors because Sophie was overwhelmed, I said no. When Frank wanted help repairing their roof on my only day off, I told him to call a contractor. The reactions were immediate. Margaret stared like I had cursed at her. "You've changed, Lena," Frank added his classic line. "We don't ask much from you." I nearly laughed. They ask for labor, money, time, emotional support, transportation, repairs, errands, and availability 24 hours a day. But sure, not much. The colder I became, the colder the house became. Meals happened in silence. Margaret stopped asking about work. Frank only spoke when something broke. Sophie barely noticed because she was busy posting engagement pictures with captions about gratitude and family. Family. That word again. Meanwhile, Richard kept doing things nobody in my house ever bothered to do. He asked how my promotion interview went. He showed me budgeting spreadsheets. He taught me how to negotiate salary increases. When my car made weird noises, he didn't mock me for not knowing enough. He showed me. One afternoon, he looked over my finances and asked, "How much do you actually have saved?" "Enough for a small place," I admitted. He smiled. "Then maybe it's time." The idea terrified me. Leaving felt impossible. Because people like me don't just move out. We escape. For months I saved aggressively. Extra shifts, less eating out, no impulse purchases. I kept quiet because I knew if my parents found out early, they'd sabotage it somehow. Then one rainy Tuesday, I signed the lease. Tiny apartment. Old appliances. Questionable carpet. But mine. When I told my parents during dinner, Margaret didn't congratulate me. She sighed. "I guess Sophie will have to find someone else to run errands." Not, "We're proud of you." Not, "Congratulations." Errands. Frank barely looked up from his plate. Don't come crawling back when things get hard. I looked around the kitchen, the chipped cabinets I repaired, the table I refinished, the walls I painted. Years of labor surrounding people who still treated me like temporary staff. "I won't," I said quietly. Moving day arrived. Nobody helped. Not Frank, not Margaret, not Sophie. Daniel and Richard did. Richard borrowed a truck. Daniel carried boxes. My own father watched from the porch with crossed arms. When we loaded the last box, Richard squeezed my shoulder. "Proud of you, kid." 2 words, that was all. Still more support than I'd gotten at home in years. My apartment wasn't glamorous. The microwave barely worked. I slept on a mattress on the floor for 2 weeks. The fridge made sounds like it was dying, but every morning I woke up in silence. No shouting, no chores waiting, no guilt. Then the text started. Hey Lena, since you're free this weekend, can you mow the lawn? Margaret, free. Because apparently moving didn't count as having a life. I replied, no. An hour later. Frank, don't forget where you came from. Translation, don't forget what role we assigned you. I ignored him. That's when relatives suddenly remembered I existed. Aunt Carol called. Your mother says you've been distant, Uncle Steve texted. Family is important. Funny how nobody called when I was exhausted. Nobody called when I paid rent and repaired gutters. But the second I stopped providing labor, everybody became concerned. Margaret had started recruiting, and deep down, I knew something worse was coming. Because people who lose control rarely leave quietly. I thought moving out would end it. Turns out toxic families don't stop when you leave. They just lose access and start looking for new doors. Barely a week after settling into my apartment, Margaret called. Her voice was sweet in the fake way that immediately made my shoulders tense. Lena, sweetheart, since you have your own place now, you probably understand how hard things are. The sink's leaking. Can you stop by? No. Silence. Then, you're really becoming selfish. I hung up. After that, the requests became ridiculous. The garage door, the television remote, picking up Sophie's packages, driving relatives from the airport. Every single time, I answered the same way. I'm sure you'll figure it out. And every time I said no, something strange happened. I felt lighter. Then Sophie called. For once, she sounded cheerful. Hey sis, haven't seen you forever? Lunch? For 2 seconds I almost believed it. Then she added, oh, and after lunch can you come fix Mom's garage door? Dad keeps making it worse. There it was. Not concern, not love. Maintenance request. I'm busy, I said. Her voice immediately changed. Wow, you really changed. No, I finally stopped. Weeks passed. The silence should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt suspicious. Then Thursday night happened. My phone lit up. Mom! Something in my stomach dropped before I even answered. Margaret sounded breathless. Lena, it's your father. He's hurt. My chest tightened despite everything. What happened? He fell fixing the gutters. We're overwhelmed. There's so much around the house. I waited. And waited. No hospital. No ambulance. No emergency. Just chores. Did you call a doctor? I asked. Annoyance immediately slipped into her voice. He doesn't need a doctor. He just can't lift things. There it was. Not concern. Need. Their favorite weapon. We need you. We need help. We need family. Translation? You belong to us. I stared around my apartment. My tiny living room. My second-hand furniture. My peace. Then, I answered calmly. Hire someone. Margaret gasped dramatically. How can you be so ungrateful after everything we've done for you? Everything. Funny word. Because I remembered everything too. The birthdays forgotten. The chores. The wedding humiliation. The years of being useful but never important. I hope Dad feels better, I said. Then hung up. 3 minutes later, Sophie texted, Wow! You abandoned Mom and Dad when they need you. You're disgusting. Disgusting. Interesting choice. I almost replied. Instead, I messaged Richard. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. He answered laughing. Let me guess. Frank discovered aging? I laughed harder than I expected. Then Richard got serious. Listen carefully, Lena. Helping people who hurt you isn't kindness. It's conditioning. That sentence stayed with me. Later that night, Margaret left a voicemail. Cold this time. If you can't support your family during hard times, don't expect to be welcomed back. Welcomed back. As if exclusion was punishment. I wasn't standing outside begging for entry anymore. I'd already left. So that weekend, I blocked their numbers. Not dramatically, Not angrily, quietly. Because peace requires maintenance, too. I thought that would be the end. Instead, it was the beginning. A few days later, my cousin Jenna texted, "Hey, your mom's telling everyone you abandoned them after Dad got injured." Of course she was. Margaret had activated extended family mode. Soon messages flooded in. "Your poor parents. Family is forever. You only get one mother." My favorite? A distant uncle sending me a message through LinkedIn. Apparently, my family trauma had become professional networking content. I screenshotted it and sent it to Richard. He called immediately, laughing so hard he wheezed. "When they can't control your actions, they attack your reputation." He was right, so I stopped defending myself. I worked. I got promoted, bought actual furniture, started planning trips, built routines, built peace. Then something unexpected happened. Richard invited me to a community event his company sponsored. Networking, local press, business owners, nothing huge. Until introductions started. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is Lena," he said proudly. "She's like a daughter to me." Like a daughter. Such a simple sentence, yet I nearly cried hearing it. Photos were taken, articles got published, and apparently Margaret saw them. Because Jenna texted 2 days later, "Your mom is furious. She says you're replacing your family." Replacing? No. I had finally found one. Then came the knock. Saturday afternoon. I opened my apartment door. Frank stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, older than I remembered. "We need to talk." I leaned against the frame. "About what?" "You've embarrassed this family enough." "Family." Again. He pointed at me. "This thing with Richard, him calling you his daughter." I looked directly at him. "You mean supporting me?" His jaw flexed. "I'm still your father." The old version of me would have shrunk. This version didn't. "No," I said quietly. "You're the man who taught me love had to be earned." For the first time in my life, Frank had no response. "You'll regret this someday," he finally muttered. I smiled. "No, I regret staying so long." Then I closed the door. And for the first time ever, I didn't feel guilty afterward.